So you've got all these refugees who are pouring into Europe, and that's encouraging others to make a try, even many who aren't in a situation where their lives are threatened. In fact, I was listening to a video. I'm going to share some of the sound from this half hour of the program. Not right off the top, but some of you may be familiar with the name Paul Joseph Watson. He does some work, I believe, with Alex Jones. But Paul Joseph Watson puts up a video every couple of days, takes a particular news topic. He's an Englishman, and he dissects it. Now, Germany is saying it will take 800,000 refugees. Now, the German economy may be strong, but 800,000 will constitute somewhere roughly about 1% of Germany's population. That's a huge cultural shift to try and absorb. And in places like Greece, where they don't have any money, or Spain, where unemployment rates are running sometimes 50%, Germany now wants its neighboring countries to take these people in as well. And a great many of Germany's neighbors are saying, are you nuts? And why are these people in such a rush to get out of places like Greece and Hungary and get to Germany? Well, because better social welfare benefits. Do you understand what's taking place here? And why all of this rush now? These are some questions that Paul Joseph Watson is asking in this video. And as I say, I'll share some of that coming up in just a couple of minutes. But they bring us to ask these questions simply because there are a lot of people out there who stand to benefit from this. And I was asking last week on the program, well, why isn't some of these wealthy Muslim countries in the Gulf region over there, why aren't they taking them in? I saw a post over the weekend. There is a committee that's working locally, and they have a website. They're working locally to bring an end to the refugee program here because, again, we simply don't know who these people are. We're not saying that they're all bad. We're just saying we simply don't know. And in Europe, they don't know. They're just coming in waves. How can you tell who they are? You can't. You know why a lot of those countries in the Middle East don't want them? Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and the like, because they think they may be terrorists. That's why. Hello? Gee, do you think that perhaps we could be dealing with something like that too on this end of the planet? Coming up on 10 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com, 55. I also was asking last week, why is it that little boy drowned trying to get from Turkey over to Greece, or to at least Europe? Because I said, why aren't the Turks taking in these people? Turns out the Turks are taking them in. But that little boy's daddy decided, hey, you know what? I can get a better deal over in Europe, and we can collect some social welfare there and live off the fat of the land. So let's get in this rickety old boat and let's go. That's why that little boy drowned. They were already being taken care of in Turkey. They were safe. There was no ISIS attacking them. They were completely shielded from that threat. And yet the old man decided, I'm going to gamble because we might be able to get somebody in Germany to pay our freight. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. And the U.S. media is breaking down along the usual suspects when it comes to this story. A guy writing by the name of Henry Chu at the Los Angeles Times, Europe's refugee crisis is darkened by the shadows of World War II. I got to this page. Not the front page, but I got to this page of the story, and you know what? You ever see those kids play that game Twister? Maybe you played it when you were young. I did too. I don't play it any longer because, well, I took my daughter and my niece to an amusement park some years ago, and I got on the roller coaster with them, and when I got off, my neck hurt for 6 weeks. So you get older, you're not as flexible. But we used to play this game called Twister. Liberals have a figurative version of that. And they twist events and words around, but it's a little bit like playing Twister. They're going to throw out their backs or their shoulders or their hips if they keep this up. They're trying to shoehorn certain things into old narratives. Page 2 of this story. Waiting for them were Czech authorities charged with registering and processing the newcomers. In their attempt to maintain order, the officials assigned numbers to each person and wrote those numbers with felt-tip pens on the refugees' outstretched hands. Makes sense, right? Oh, gee, we got 1,200 people here. We better figure out what we're doing, so just give me that felt-tip marker. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You understand how this is working. It also washes off. And even if you're from that part of the world where you don't like to bathe, and that might be the case with some of these people, eventually your skin just grows out and, flakes away, and it will move. It'll be gone on its own. Month or two away from the time it actually takes place. The writer says, what seemed a simple bureaucratic shortcut immediately produced uncomfortable evocations of the Holocaust, of death camp inmates whose arms were tattooed with prisoner numbers by the Nazis. Jewish and human rights organizations had a cow. Well, he says we're aghast. But I'll say had a cow. Why? Because someone got a mark on them with a felt tip? This has got nothing to do with that. To try to even say that there's some sort of relationship between the two just shows you how evil some of these liberals are trying to get these people into Europe. Here's a quote. It is an image we cannot bear, which brings to mind the entry procedures at Nazi extermination camps, when millions of men, women, and children were marked with a number like animals before being sent to their deaths. That came from a Jewish community leader in Rome. The Czech government quickly halted the practice, saying it had intended nothing malicious. Of course it hadn't. But now you can't even keep track of who these people are. You don't know who they are in the first place. Are you a terrorist? No, infidel, I am not. Well, good enough for me. Go through. But you can't even put a felt-tip number on them, for crying out loud. Or somebody says, you're going to be slaughtering them in death camps next, aren't you? Give me a break. Somebody's got to grab some of these liberals by the shirt collar and give them a shaking or two. 9:13, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX. As promised, this is about 6 minutes long. I'm going to break it up into two different segments. Paul Joseph Watson on his YouTube channel talking about this situation. This first segment is about 3 minutes long. Take a listen. He's coming at this directly from a European perspective.
European citizens have spent the last 2 years voting to reject the failed policies of multiculturalism and mass immigration. So isn't it an amazing coincidence how left-wing parties in Europe who will benefit from votes from future naturalized migrants and their children have been so welcoming of them? Being completely dependent on government, those naturalized citizens will then vote for even bigger government. Big corporations also love mass immigration. It means a fresh supply of cheap labour that will drive down everyone else's wages. So who else benefits? Economic migrants who are abusing the crisis by claiming to be Syrian refugees when they're clearly not. As the Sydney Morning Herald reports, 90% of those arriving in Serbia from Macedonia say they're Syrian but have no documents to prove it. 90%. They're finding discarded ID cards belonging to Pakistanis and Bangladeshis. These people aren't fleeing war. They're not running from ISIS. They're trampling on the backs of legitimate Syrian refugees in an effort to try and suck off Europe's giant welfare state. And then you have the Syrians themselves. Isn't it an amazing coincidence how many of these war refugees have no interest whatsoever in remaining in peaceful European countries that refuse to shower them with cash? And many of the refugees don't even look like refugees at all. They're mainly working age men, well-fed, not emaciated, not hungry. They're not wearing rags. Many of them are even carrying the latest iPhone. And I don't begrudge people seeking a better lifestyle, but can we please stop pretending that all these individuals are fleeing from war? What makes someone a refugee is that they're fleeing from danger, not fleeing to a higher standard of living. What on earth has Pakistanis flooding into Sweden to get on benefits got to do with actual Syrians escaping ISIS persecution? And how is that in any way comparable to Jews fleeing Nazi Germany, as some sectors of the media have framed it? But isn't it commendable that rich Gulf Arab states located right next to Syria are really pulling their weight in helping Europe deal with the burden. Here's a list of how many refugees Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates and Oman have taken in. Nada, zilch, zero, sweet, F.A. While Germany alone takes in 800,000. Months ago, ISIS promised to exploit the migrant crisis to infiltrate thousands of terrorists into Europe. But don't worry, they'll be well looked after if Sweden enacts what some of its political class are calling for: jobs, welfare and housing for Islamic State jihadists, all at taxpayer expense. So while European citizens are being frisked at airports every single day, potential terrorists are being invited straight in with no security checks, no ID checks, nothing. And in the name of diversity, we're welcoming into Europe huge numbers of people who are completely intolerant of diversity.
That's Paul Joseph Watson. I've got a couple more minutes. I'll run it following the break in a couple of minutes. We're a couple of minutes away from the break, but I want to make sure we have enough time for it. When he talks about diversity, you're not going to believe the story he shares about the headmaster of a German school and the warning to the local children about what they have to do so they do not offend their new friendly Muslim neighbors. Yeah, and it is mind-boggling that this is going on, and we are hearing now that there is pressure to increase the number of these people coming to the United States as well. Now, in just a few short weeks, we're expecting 300 or so here in Magic Valley. But now you have people in Congress, yes, some of the Marxist-Leninists, fellow travelers who are trying to destroy the United States, which they hate so much. They are saying we need to bring 65,000 of these people into this country. And if these numbers, and you're starting to realize what's happening. I was just reading in the Wall Street Journal today, which has been editorializing for 15 years now for open borders in the United States so that we can have cheap labor from South and Central America here to depress your wages, to make its readership wealthier over your corpse eventually. They have now suddenly realized, hey, wait a minute. This is causing people all over the Africa and Asia to come into Europe. It's going to crash the European governments. Gee golly gosh, how long did it take the Wall Street Journal editorial board time to wake up to that? Even people as far away as Nigeria are listening to their radios and saying, hey, gosh, this European dole thing's a pretty good deal. How do we get there? 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. I'll share a couple more minutes with you from Paul Joseph Watson from his video, the sound of it, coming up on the other side of the break. In the meantime, it's 57. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. You're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com on this lovely Tuesday morning. If you were with us in the last segment of the program, I shared part one of what's the audio from a video compiled by Paul Joseph Watson. And he's a regular contributor to a couple of websites here as well in America. But he's coming at this from an English perspective about what's going on with their refugee crisis, which may be coming here. And we're talking about additionally adding to the numbers that we are already expecting in this community. You know it's going to happen. And it almost seems like it's a sinister plan, part of that Agenda 21 United Nations cabal, in order to crash Western governments. This is Paul Joseph Watson. This is part two from his video, talking about the political correctness that is being forced upon Europeans so they don't offend all of the refugees coming to feed at the trough. And number two, telling you exactly the backstory of what happened with that little boy who drowned.
Case in point, a head teacher at a school in Germany, situated near a migrant camp, is telling teen girls not to wear miniskirts because it might offend the migrants and provoke attacks. Many of these people are illiterate. They have no concept whatsoever of Western liberal democracy. They have no concept of freedom. They have no concept of treating women as first-class citizens. And there's no plan in place by European governments to integrate them into this way of life. As Peter Hitchens writes, Mass immigration means we adapt to them when they should be adapting to us. And what was the cause of this crisis in the first place? And I've said this so many times that it seems almost cliched at this point. But the media still never mentions it. They act as if this crisis just emerged out of nowhere. It began after NATO governments armed and funded jihadist rebels in Libya and Syria, many of whom went on to join ISIS. If you keep destabilizing secular governments in the Middle East and trying to replace them with jihadists, the wave of legitimate migrants trying to escape that turmoil will never end. As Ron Paul writes, here is the real solution to the refugee problem. Stop meddling in the affairs of other countries. Embrace the prosperity that comes with a peaceful foreign policy, not the poverty that goes with running an empire. But after causing the migrant crisis by intervening in Syria in an effort to topple Assad, the same leaders are now using the migrant crisis to justify further intervention in Syria in an effort to topple Assad. And as per usual, they're resting their propaganda on the corpses of dead kids, because we're going to save the Syrian children by bombing the Syrian children. And all the usual hashtag trendies are jumping on the grief bandwagon to try and push their political agenda. Listen, until you're prepared to personally house a migrant and pay their way, stop tweeting migrants welcome to try and make yourself look good in front of your progressive friends. The little boy washed up on a Turkish beach didn't die because the West has immigration laws. His family was already safe in Turkey. He died because of criminal people smugglers who are willing to break those laws in order to get a payoff. European leaders are committing cultural and demographic suicide.
Yep. And we're looking to do the same thing here, right in this Magic Valley. 926, Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. I want to thank Paul Joseph Watson for the video. I listened to that yesterday, and I said, I've got to share this. People have to be aware, really, of what's going on with all of this. He speaks of Libya and Syria. Let's be honest. Hillary Rodham Clinton is responsible for the disintegration of those countries and the rise of ISIS. It has to be put directly at her feet. We have a caller with us, 736-0300. You're up next, and you're on the air.
Yes, good morning, Bill. One of the big problems we have is many of these socialist countries over there went broke because they were letting the good times roll. Now they're looking for a place to dump all their welfare recipients, and I think the Magic Valley is going to be one of their major targets.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And we better be prepared. We better learn how to say no, no, and no. And we better be willing to do it at the ballot box, because we're going to have to start removing the chaff that has been, how shall we put it, in cahoots with that program. Thank you for the call. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. I appreciated what you just played, because it really outlines in just a short time what's really happening. I really appreciate you doing that and bringing this attention. I in Sunday's paper, of course, it pointed out that, there's going to be a open forum coming up.
Yeah.
But I noticed nobody, it's all State Department people that are all pro refugee program, basically, on the program. So it's a stacked deck, and I don't see anybody that's going to be on the panel against the refugee program.
Well, I suggested to the publisher of that newspaper, he contacted me, and I suggested that they have people like you who've done your research as an alternative, at least to be a contrarian point of view. And he said, oh, this is an informational program. Well, if it is, then allow us to bring our information in as well.
That's right. And of course, that's they're never going to do that. And I remember years ago, we had a deal about the liberation theology, and we had a ringer. I was actually on the panel and got interrupted, and by a liberal that didn't like my point of view. And another lady at the end was from Venezuela, and boy, when she got to the floor, she really laid it out there as to what was really going on. And the same thing with another CSI program on the United Nations. It was a stacked deck. And, so the other side never really gets a chance to voice their viewpoint.
Yeah, I told the publisher that they would not get any time on this radio show to promote such a one-sided event. And then he told me, he said, "I am a leader, not a follower." Well, if you're going to be a leader, then lead for everybody, and
That's
not
right.
just your own personal, your own personal viewpoint on this. Look, they've had a good year in the newspaper business. Editors are now allowed to get married. But tell you what, they've got to start realizing that we can just walk away from buying those subscriptions anytime we like.
Well, and I think that's, I bet I don't know what their circulation is, but all of my friends have dropped their subscriptions. And the only reason I keep it basically is to just find out what the other side is saying. And in the obituaries, I've been around here quite a while, like to see who is passing away.
That's true. When you've got to go to the visitation and the like. Hey, thank you very much for the telephone call. 9:30, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. 59. Hey, I've got more on this subject coming up in just a few minutes.